Hey guys, good morning. Today we are going to discuss Romans chapter 1 verse 18 to 32. Before starting our Bible study, we have to read this passage thoroughly for better understanding. And now we are going to see subtitles like God's wrath against mankind's sin, verse 18 to 32. God's standards and made clear to men, rejected by men, following man-made idols, following perverse desires, and list of their sins, blatant and enthusiastic. For this passage, we can prepare some questions for our Bible study discussion. The first one we can prepare: is not God a loving God? And how could He have wrath? Is His wrath like ours when we are angry? And what is the difference? What is the focus of His wrath? And the second question: what is the truth which the wicked people suppress? And third question: what does it mean that what is known about God's evident within them? How was God made it evident to them? How can someone see God's power or attributes? What is the theological term for this? Is there any legitimate excuse for not believing in God? Why not? But many people claim to be atheist. Why? And why would they not honor God although they knew in their hearts is real and true? How can we apply a proper understanding of this passage to gospel sharing? What should our response be when we see the creation of God? Next question: today when we read this, we may think of evolution as a substitute for believing in God, but what alternatives might they have set up then? Why would anyone rather worship an ugly idol than God? What praise is repeated 3 times from verse 24 to 25? And what does it mean that God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity? Next question we can prepare: what do people worship and serve now instead of the Creator? Next question: what natural function did the woman exchange? Why do you think Paul mentions the sin of homosexuality here instead of murder or stealing or something else? And next question: why are those who do these sins worthy of death, even things like disobeying parents, or why? So related to this topic, we have some statements we can see, like Psalms and 19, Romans 2, Psalm 14 and all. We are going to see verse by verse. Introduction: Paul begins his point-by-point exposition of the gospel with the sinfulness or depravity of man. This is an essential point. It shows that God is just and that we are totally depraved. If God were to allow us to go our own way completely, what will happen? Which He sometimes does. We would descend into evil quickly and enthusiastically. Our complete lack of ability to God and sinful state means that we are separated from God and need His help, His grace to somehow solve this problem. I have titled this part of the chapter "The Necessity of the Gospel." Them in this chapter refers to verse 18 to 20. The gospel who reject God and substitute idol worship or any similar form of rejecting God, atheism, evolution, agnosticism. In the next chapter, he deals with those who think they are moral, not like the clear pagan behavior in this chapter, such as those with Paul's religions might, and also with the Jews. First point: God's wrath or justice. This passage shows us the necessity of the gospel. If sin didn't make God angry, there would be no need for Jesus to die. If God is only love, then He could simply decide not to punish any sins. But this passage shows us that God has holy anger. This is not the kind of anger we might have if someone cheats us, lies to us, or violates our rights. It is more like the righteous anger we might feel if we heard about a person abusing children or cheating the elderly. This wrath might be demonstrated in a number of ways. It is shown in the way God made up the world to punish those who violate His moral order. It is more clearly seen by God's direct intervention in the world, such as the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, the sentence passed on Adam and Eve, etc. Just as love was the motivation for the crucifixion, so wrath is the motivation for divine judgment. Notice here the object of God's wrath. It is the ungodliness and sinfulness of man. It is the sin that makes God angry. God's holy anger should teach us to respect God and realize He is not only a loving father figure, but He is also a just father figure who will punish those who don't comply with His moral laws. Notice the word all. No sin escapes God's attention. Wow. The next point, God's general revelation. Some basic things of God are evident to everyone. The knowledge is there and it is our responsibility to accept it. There is no exception of someone who cannot see this basic truth of God's existence. This knowledge is referred to as general revelation and is twofold. It includes the conscience of God's moral order. When you look at 19 and chapter 2 verse 14, and it includes creation. We will discuss conscience more in chapter 2 and focus on creation this time. God's power and His nature can be clearly seen through His creation. How the complexity, scale, order, variety and perfection all point to God as the creator. I often use this point in sharing the gospel because it is a very strong argument for God's presence and it is also a biblical one. There is simply no other reasonable explanation for our existence or existence of the universe. From the smallest of creatures like the bee or ant to amazing mammals like the giraffe to ice crystals to stars and galaxies, the universe portrays God's order lines and design. Every person is responsible to respond positively to this, but many don't. This also answers the question many like to ask about some guy on some island who has not heard the gospel. Is he responsible? Although he may not know as much, he is responsible for what he knows, and the sinfulness of man will lead him to reject this knowledge of God unless God specifically intervenes to call that person to Himself through some divine way. God's general revelation condemns those who reject it and will be strong enough testimony to render a guilty verdict on Judgment Day. God gives this knowledge to condemn those who reject, but also a matter of love to encourage people to seek after God. The third point, man is without excuse and knows God is true deep inside his heart. Why is God wrathful? God's wrath is stirred up against these people specifically because they reject the truth they know to be true. The Bible is very clear here. There will be no excuse, no judgment day for people who say, I didn't know or I was thought there is no God. It is comforting to me to know people in their heart of hearts already recognize God's existence. So in sharing the gospel, it is not a matter of convincing someone because they already should recognize that God is true, but willfully choose not to. It is not whether I can win a debate or not. Creation ends the debate before it even begins. The question is whether someone will choose to follow God or continue to reject Him. The fourth point, man rejects God in favor of idol worship. This chapter is very sad and shows the depth of sinfulness of the human heart. Instead of honoring God, which is the chief purpose of man, humankind as a whole has chosen to reject God. They substitute other things for God. Different eras might be different things, but the result is the same. During biblical times, they substituted idols for God. They worshipped created things like animals, but also stones and wood and gold. A classic example when Aaron made the golden calf and they worshipped it and said it saved them from Israel. Oh, what a wonder we have seen there, right? The rebellion against God. The Philistines worshipped a god called Dagon, which was half fish. The Egyptians worshipped the sun, moon, star, cows, frogs, etc. In Indians, as we still hold cows as sacred, people claim to be wise, but it is actually foolishness. How perfectly evolution fits here. People claim that evolution is a brilliant discovery. The educated people mostly believe it and they think they are so clever to come out with this theory. But according to God, they are fools. Actually, another name for April Fool's Day is National Atheist Day. The wisdom of the world is foolishness to God. Yes, absolutely. When you look at Corinthian chapter, why do people do this? We see soon after this that they turn to sin. There is a close connection in the Bible between rejecting God, idol worship and sinning. We'll look at that closer in a few minutes. The fifth point is God's judicial abandonment to allow men to follow their own will. We see here several times that God gave them over. The first time is to in the lust of their hearts impurity. The second is to degrading passions, and the third is to depraved mind. This term gave over is a judicial term, like if a judge pronounced sentence and then hands over the prisoner to the officer to execute the sentence. It shows God's justice and man's responsibility. Absolutely. God does not cause them to sin, and neither does their sin please Him. In fact, God is actively involved in restraining sin through both world governments, His church now and believers, but for some individuals and societies, when they continue on in willful rejection, God decides to remove all barriers to their sin and allow them to follow their sin to its natural conclusion. Because man's will has been enslaved to sin since the fall of Adam, this abandonment will lead to worse and worse sins. It is individualized or group cases of what will take place during the tribulation for the entire world when God removes His restraining influence over sin. Satan takes over and the world becomes a chess pit of sit at and devil. The sixth one is twisting belief leads to twisting morals. You will become like who you believe in. This chapter shows very clearly that what you believe in will affect who you are. Our beliefs shape our worldviews, which in turn shape our character. When people turn to idolatry, other sins followed closely. Remember Aaron's calf. After they started worshipping it, the entire camp degenerated into a wild party full of immorality. Remember when the people of Israel worshipped the idol at Peor in Moab with Balaam. They also began committing sexual immorality. The nation around Israel worshipped female fertility goddesses, basically sex gods, and not surprisingly their worship consisted of sexual immorality. Same things in Ephesus, same thing with Greeks. The Aztecs in Central America worshipped violent, bloodthirsty gods and therefore made human sacrifices to those idols. This passage is a summary of this behavior throughout world history. Whenever people turn to idolatry, people turn to sin. Why? We have to discuss the reasons, including the fact that idols are man's creation and therefore they are not responsible to them because they can't see, hear or judge. Idols are little gods, creations of man, and therefore can do nothing when man sins. Man can also assign whatever morals are lacked therefore to those so-called gods they want. According to the 4th century historians, Eusebius, the oldest civilization in the world didn't even have idol worship. That began roughly around the time of Abraham, when people got further from the beginning and creation. The chain of wrong belief and sin doesn't hold true only to traditional idolatry, but is still true with atheism, evolution and agnosticism. The effect of atheism is the same as idolatry. You don't believe there is a judge or you are responsible to any higher authority. So you can do what you want. Evolution is a fancy form of this and leads to deterioration of morals, which have no place in evolution thought. Agnosticism doesn't believe God is important. It doesn't care about these things. If these major issue of life and unimportant, then so are the smaller issues of their personal behavior. Sure, a person with these beliefs might not consciously make these connections, but they will unconsciously. You can see this by the priorities they have. A believer will realize God is watching us all the time and will hold us responsible for our actions. Don't you think this will impact our behavior? Of course it will. The seventh point, you reap what you sow. When you look at Galatians chapter 6 verse 7 to 8, God set up natural order where sins generally will bring forth negative consequences in this life. Absolutely. A children disobeying his parents will generally die younger. Maybe he will cross the road when his parents say no and be hit by a car, or he won't learn to eat healthy food, so will eat too much junk food and die of bad health, or he will live a wild lifestyle which will take effect on his body. A person who is generous will find that others will normally be generous in return, while a stingy person may find he has no one to help him in time of need. There are some examples. What is the examples in this passage? In this passage it is that homosexuality, perverting God's natural order, comes with harmful side effects. AIDS is also a clear example. If you don't commit sexual immorality, you won't catch AIDS 99% of the time. The world tries to find band-aid solution. I even talked to one guy at Hyderabad who is researching how to make homosexuality safer. Rather than fix the root of the problem, other negative side effects might include social stigma, losing your job if your boss finds out, etc. These things depend somewhat on the general morality of the culture you live in. The point is that sin is extremely destructive. It leads to a guilt-ridden, miserable life, and finally to judgment by the just God. The further people go down this path of evil, the more unhappy they will get, and they may try more and more evil things to satiate their desires, which will increase their guilt again. It's a slippery slope, and once a person reaches a certain point, God may remove his restraint and just let them slide. The eighth point, the downward spiral continues with a large array of sin individuality. And the ninth point, the final step of the sin is not only do it but encourage others to do it. Sin loves company, right? The slippery slope gets worse and worse. Notice that gave over first is just to sexual immorality, probably over the normal kind. The next is to sexual immorality of twisting God's man or woman order. The final is to a depraved mind, where the mind itself is darkened, almost like that of an animal, which just follow its basic instinct. Here the final step is not only to do these sins in the closet, but to do them publicly and enthusiastically, and encourage others to do the same. This is the case with many sins in the India and all metropolitan cities right now, including homosexuality, arrogance, gossips, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, haters of God, etc. I hope you can understand this Bible study. We'll meet in our next Bible study. God bless you. Thank you.